All right, in this video, we're going to run the math real quick. Game Pass versus Sony's exclusives that they make. Which one do you think is a more profitable outfit? Now, the reason I'm comparing Game Pass from a profitability standpoint is because obviously it seems like it's Microsoft's primary business direction in regard to how they're going. So that's why I'm making the comparison. And also with Sony, you can already tell that their single player games have been their bread and butter for the longest time. So when we actually put into perspective these particular, parameters, we can pretty much make a very good guess as to where the numbers may lie. Now, the very first thing we want to do is we want to look at Sony's exclusives. When you look at Sony's exclusives, you'll realize that these exclusives are going for anywhere from $200 million all the way to $220 million to produce lately. The Last of Us Part 2, Horizon Forbidden West, and God of War Ragnarok. These games cost a lot to make. In regard to sales, the numbers are anywhere from 10 million copies all the way to about 20 million copies. And when I say 10 million, I'm talking about Horizon Forbidden West, which is right now about 9.8 million in sales. The Last of Us about 10 million, and then God of War is approaching 20 million in its own sales. Now, when you look at these numbers and say, okay, if we do sales minus the cost to develop, we're looking at a profitability of at least $300 million in the case of these games, and a little bit more in terms of the game God of War Ragnarok. Does that make sense? So if we put the numbers in perspective and say, okay, if we open up a calculator here and say The Last of Us cost $200 million to make and it sold 10 million copies, right? Let's say 10 million copies, and let's do that number. Let's do that math real quick. So 10 million, right? 10M. Oh, I think I have too many zeros. Yep. So 10 million, right? Times, let's say you paid $60 for every copy. So that is pretty much 600 million, right? Minus 200 million. Let me see. Million, I need one more zero, 200 million, there we go, and we're 400 million. So that's pretty much how we're running those numbers. Now keep in mind that Sony releases these games once every year, or at least we'll get some years where we get two of them. So like Horizon Forbidden West and Ragnarok, they came out in the same year, and both of them pretty much came in at that huge price point. I estimate that those two games are probably going to bring in $1 billion for Sony. Now, let's do Game Pass's math. From the numbers that we have with Game Pass, all we have is that Game Pass has about 25 million subscribers. This number was actually gleaned from a Brazilian economic forum of some kind, and the data was actually made available. So this is how people were able to get, the numbers, again, seeing that this particular number might also be arbitrary in a sense. Now, if we run the numbers for Game Pass at 25 million subscribers and say each subscriber is paying the base, say $10 a month. Let's just not use Ultimate. Let's just say Ultimate factors in even for those people who are doing the $1, Game Pass Wonder, thing. That way we can just kind of get round figures. Remember, I did it for Horizon Horizon Forbidden West and the PlayStation games. So let's just do it for Microsoft just to call all things equal. So 25 million, right? And then let's just say everybody is paying $10 a month. So that's going to $120 a year. So that puts us somewhere around $3 billion. Now, this $3 billion, we also have to look at money for acquiring games and also money for overhead and upkeep. Now, overhead and upkeep has always been something where it appears Microsoft had the infrastructure and was already hosting Xbox Live and Gold and all that. So infrastructure should not necessarily cost Microsoft much because they already have the infrastructure in place. But if we say, okay, $1 billion has gone towards infrastructure, and in that $1 billion, we also see the acquisition of video games in a sense, we're just going to subtract $1 billion from this, and we see that Game Pass may have a $2 billion profitability. And that is one calendar year. Now, you might say, but these games, how do we know the numbers that, are, used to acquire these games? Is Microsoft acquiring these games for, $100 million a piece or $10 million a piece? Well, the answer is quite arbitrary. Every game, according to what we've seen with Game Pass, has a, very specific number that's, unique to that game. It's not one size fits all. Example is a game like Final Fantasy, Square Enix's Guardians of the Galaxy. Why did I say Final Fantasy? Guardians of the Galaxy was, estimated to have actually cost Microsoft anywhere from $5 to $10 million. In fact, GOTG on Game Pass Cost how much. I mean, there's an article here that actually does say it. It's actually here. Let me go ahead and show you guys real quick. And this particular article, or this little subset, is actually cited from this article here. And it says, how much did Xbox pay? A new report reveals how much Microsoft may have paid to get Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy on Xbox Game Pass. An industry analyst named David Gibson claimed that Microsoft paid $5 to $10 million to get Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy on Game Pass. So some games would get as high as that amount, some games would be low. But the library is already filled with a lot of Microsoft games and Bethesda games, so we can't necessarily account for the remaining games in total. Then you also have the EA games, which I'm sure there's a partnership that doesn't require Microsoft to actually pay much, except maybe for sharing or something like that, just to give EA exposure. So maybe there might be some agreements there, as well as the Ubisoft agreements, which I think, since it's beneficial for both, it may not cost Microsoft more. So that's why I'm estimating $1 billion. Even if we estimated $1.5 billion, you still see that Game Pass is in a position where it's churning in at least $1.5 to $2 billion a year. That is with very minimal work, not spending money on development, just spending money on infrastructure and acquiring games from all kinds of different places, giving your consumers value. And you can realize that Microsoft's Game Pass is actually more profitable than the Sony's, exclusive model. Even though the exclusives may be selling like hotcake, by the time Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok and The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima and all these games would, in a sense, accumulate to, say, a few $1 billion or like $2 billion, Microsoft would probably double that number. And now with their move to try to buy Activision, they have already seen increases in, the Game Pass subscribers as well, because some people are trying to hedge their bets. They think that Microsoft is going to be in a position where they actually put out, the Call of Duty game if they actually acquire this particular, publisher. Now, we don't know if that's going to be the case, but you see how, for the most part, them trying to acquire this publisher shows their commitment to want to get more games on their platform. That already signals to a lot of people out there. So this is exactly why you're seeing a lot of folk in the Sony ecosystem start to kind of, sense exactly why they see Sony going for the live service games. I think what Sony is trying to do is it's trying to mitigate that gap where we're making only, like, say, max, if we release 2 games in 1 year, we're going to be making profits of about $400 million. Well, how about the remaining $400 million that we can be making from that strategy? I know they make money on PlayStation subscriptions and all that, but most of that goes to infrastructure and all kinds of stuff. And they also make 30% on games as well. I'm just saying that if you kind of think about it, they would love to be in a position where they're able to continue to bring in more funds than that money so that they can make a higher profit and also establish more of these single player games. So the AAA games make a whole lot of sense and seem to be what they're trying to use to bridge that gap. But for now, it appears that Game Pass is actually a very big money bringer for Microsoft. In fact, this whole Activision acquisition is not necessarily, and many people continue to say that, like, oh, it's market consolidation. You have to see the big picture. Game Pass is Xbox's main, bread and butter. Anything that they're buying is going straight to Game Pass, so they're trying to expand upon that particular bread and butter. They want to make it stronger. The same way Sony is going ahead to pay, all these other studios to bring their games to Xbox, to PlayStation as a timed exclusive in order to continue to expand, their console base and continue to expand their business model. Microsoft is basically playing its own game to try to do the same thing. So all of this is going to play itself out. If the Activision deal doesn't go through, Microsoft's going to go buy something else that's about $10 billion or $15 billion. It's not really going to be a big deal overall, because a lot of these other investors out there, they don't really have as much patience to wait for their companies that they own, shares in to mature. Microsoft, on the other hand, understands that it's a major player in this hardware game and can sit. So it's going to be in a position where it can pay a lot of money, for acquiring some crazy publishers or even some crazy studios out there. And you guys are going to really see this whole console competition market really heat up very soon. But I'll get out of your hair. Thanks so much for watching the video. I appreciate you guys' time and audience. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.